The news reached Dakota Johnson in the most unexpected way, quietly, abruptly, and with a heaviness that made her stop breathing for a moment. She was in the middle of a casual meeting, smiling politely as someone spoke, when her phone buzzed with a message from a mutual friend. At first, she thought it was something trivial, but when she opened the message and saw the words, "Jamie, surgery, serious," her heart dropped. The room around her faded. Voices blurred. All she could hear was the sound of her own pulse pounding in her ears. Within minutes, Dakota excused herself, ignoring the confused looks from those around her. She stepped into the hallway with trembling fingers, rereading the message again and again as if her mind refused to accept it. Jamie Dornan, healthy, strong, always energetic, was now suddenly undergoing a major surgery that none of them had seen coming. The friend offered almost no details, only saying the operation was urgent and the situation wasn't good. That phrase alone was enough to make her palms go cold. Dakota tried calling, texting, reaching out to anyone who could give her more information. Nothing. Every unanswered call fueled her panic. She remembered the last time she saw Jamie weeks earlier, how he laughed with that familiar warmth, how he insisted he was fine, how he brushed off the fatigue she thought she noticed in his eyes. Was he hiding something? Had he been suffering quietly while pretending everything was normal? The thought made her chest tighten painfully. When the first online leak appeared, an anonymous post claiming Jamie had been rushed into surgery due to a serious internal condition, the internet exploded instantly. Fans flooded timelines with shock and worry, searching desperately for updates. News outlets started posting unverified reports within minutes, each headline more dramatic than the last. Some said he'd collapsed. Others claimed he'd been hiding symptoms for months. No one knew the truth, and that made everything worse. Dakota felt her anxiety spike as she watched the chaos unfold. She wasn't just another concerned observer. Jamie was someone who had walked beside her through some of the most emotionally demanding years of her career. They had shared pressure, vulnerability, laughter, pain, and an unspoken bond forged in the strange, intense world of 50 Shades. And now, knowing he was lying on an operating table somewhere, possibly fighting for his health, she couldn't sit still. She cancelled her schedule without a second thought. The team around her tried to ask questions, but she didn't have the patience to explain. All she knew was that she needed to get to the hospital where Jamie was being treated. A driver was called. A car pulled up. Dakota climbed in with shaking hands and eyes that refused to blink too long, afraid she might burst into tears if she did. On the way there, more leaks appeared online. Voices claiming to be hospital staff, friends, insiders. One said the surgery was life-saving. Another said Jamie had been hiding pain for months. A third claimed he had collapsed during a private event recently. Dakota read none of it. She couldn't. Her thoughts were locked on the man she once joked was impossible to read, who now felt further out of reach than ever. When she finally arrived at the hospital, the atmosphere felt heavier than she expected. People whispered in hallways. Nurses exchanged sympathetic glances. A security guard led her toward the restricted area after recognizing her. Everything in her body felt tight with dread. She was so terrified of what she might see, or what she might not see, that she nearly stopped walking altogether. But then came the detail that shook her even more than the surgery itself. A nurse, trying to comfort her, gently said, "He asked for you before they took him in." Dakota froze. For a moment, she couldn't even breathe. Jamie asked for her? In a moment as critical as this? The words replayed again and again in her mind, cutting through the storm of panic with something deeper. Something that felt like a mixture of sorrow and unspoken history. A few steps later, she reached the hallway outside the operating room. And there, through the narrow glass window, she saw him lying on the table, motionless, pale, surrounded by machines and doctors moving urgently around him. Her hand flew to her mouth, and a sharp ache shot through her chest. No camera, no script, no performance. This was real, too real. A witness nearby later said Dakota whispered something under her breath as she pressed her hand against the glass. Something raw, something emotional, something that the witness said no one was prepared to hear. But before they could reveal exactly what she said, the video cut off, leaving the entire world desperate for the truth, and desperate to know what Dakota felt in the moment she thought she might lose Jamie forever. The full video leaked just as dawn broke, grainy hospital footage recorded from the far end of the hallway. It showed Dakota standing frozen in front of the surgical window, her shoulders trembling, her eyes fixed on Jamie's still body. This time, the clip didn't cut off. It carried on long enough for the world to finally hear what she whispered, the words that broke millions of hearts instantly. "Please don't leave, you don't get to leave me like this." The moment her voice cracked, the internet fell silent with shock. Dakota didn't know she was being filmed. The vulnerability in her expression wasn't meant for public consumption. She wasn't a Hollywood actress in that moment. She was simply a woman terrified of losing someone who had been a constant, steady presence in her life for nearly a decade. Her hand stayed pressed to the glass while nurses moved quickly around her. A doctor passed by and gently invited her to sit down, but she refused. She stood there until her legs weakened, until the weight of fear nearly pulled her to the floor. What people didn't know, what the leaked video finally showed, was the moment Dakota collapsed into the chair behind her, hands clasped, whispering Jamie's name like a prayer. "He said he was fine," she murmured. "He promised he was fine." Her voice was barely audible, but the microphone from a nearby monitor caught fragments of her heartbreak. The clip was painful to watch, almost too intimate, but it revealed a truth that had been buried under years of professionalism and silence. Dakota cared, deeply, fiercely, overwhelmingly. Hours passed before a surgeon finally emerged from the operating room. Dakota shot to her feet instantly, clutching her jacket, her breath trembling. The world would later replay that moment endlessly, the doctor removing his mask, Dakota bracing for impact, and the unbearable pause before he finally spoke. "He made it," he said softly. "The surgery was complicated, but he's stable now." Dakota's reaction wasn't dramatic or cinematic. She simply exhaled the breath she had been holding for hours and covered her face as silent tears streamed down her cheeks. The doctor then revealed what Jamie had been hiding. He had been dealing with a serious internal condition for months, quietly managing symptoms until they escalated dangerously. He didn't want publicity. He didn't want worry. He didn't want anyone, especially Dakota, to carry the burden with him. He thought he could handle it alone, the surgeon added. But it became life-threatening faster than he expected. That sentence hit Dakota harder than anything else. He tried to handle it alone. Of course he did. Jamie was always the strong one, the private one, the one who protected others even when he was falling apart inside. She felt a painful surge of anger, fear, and love all tangled together. How could he think she wouldn't want to be there for him? How could he think she wouldn't care? A few hours later, Dakota was allowed to enter the recovery room. A nurse led her inside, and for a moment, she hesitated at the doorway, afraid of what she might see. Jamie lay there, pale and fragile-looking, tubes running from his arms, monitors blinking softly. He looked nothing like the man the world knew, strong, charming, unshakably composed. He looked human. He looked breakable. Dakota approached him slowly, sitting beside the bed, afraid to make a sound. Then she reached for his hand, carefully at first, like she was afraid he might disappear if she touched him too quickly. When her fingers wrapped around his, she felt warmth. Faint, but real, and that was enough to make her breathe again. She leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "You scared me," she said, wiping a tear from her cheek. "You can't do that again. Not to me." It wasn't romantic. It wasn't scripted. It was raw honesty from someone who had spent years pretending her feelings were strictly platonic. Jamie didn't respond. He was still unconscious, but his fingers twitched gently, almost as if he heard her. By the time Jamie woke up hours later, Dakota was still there. She hadn't moved. She hadn't slept. When his eyes finally opened, blinking weakly, her breath caught in her throat. Jamie's gaze drifted around the room until it landed on her. And then he whispered, voice hoarse and fragile, "You stayed." Dakota nodded, unable to speak. Jamie squeezed her hand, and in that moment, Years of unspoken emotion seemed to settle into something undeniable. Something pure. Something deeper than friendship or nostalgia. Something that both of them had tried to ignore, but could no longer pretend didn't exist. And when the world found out Dakota had stayed through the entire surgery, through the recovery, through the rising panic and the relief, the internet didn't gossip. It wept.